Thank you all for joining us today. So this is actually the second in a series of webinars that we're hosting on the topic of human to the power of AI. So how can we actually bring AI into the decision-making process of organizations? Just some quick introductions from the team here. Let me start with myself. My name is Lanny Royberg. I'm the co-founder of Cloverpop. My career has really been spanning from analytics focused on the growth topic. So thinking about forecasting, commercial analytics. Started my career out at A.T. Kearney, focused on that same topic. And then to 4i, which was much more about foresight analytics and predicting the future. Then at Fractal, really the end-to-end technology stacks. But what we realized was if we want to get value from the technology, the analytics, the AI capabilities, we really have to think about the business outcomes first. And decisions were always a very good conduit to that. And we'll get into that topic, much more here today. So very excited to be with everybody, talk about a really exciting topic around bringing AI to decision making. And so thanks for joining us. On the call here, we also have our other co-founder, Eric Larson. And Eric, why don't you just spend a minute introducing yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Larson. I've been building software products for almost 3 decades now and focused on collaboration and business process management and digital marketing. And about 12 years ago, I went deep into decision making and sort of the last frontier of the digital transformation of business, and thinking of decisions not just as something that we do or something that happens, but something that has systems and processes and that can be measured and improved over time. So very excited to be here. I'll be helping out, answering questions, and you'll see me pop up whenever you guys have a question. So please feel free to use that Q&A pod as we go. Great.
Thanks, Eric. So just very quickly, we are representing Cloverpop. Cloverpop is a decision intelligence company. We deliver both decision intelligence platform plus the decision AI capabilities that go into it. We work with customers across multiple industries: consumer goods, retail, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing. A lot of our work and thought leadership has been used by multiple publications, including the Wall Street Journal, HBR, New York Times, et cetera. So we've been in the space for quite some time, and very exciting developments happening, especially with the most recent surge in interest and development within the AI world. So let's get started. And to talk about AI first, of course, advanced analytics, predictive analytics, and all those different elements have been around for a long time. But let's go back to November of 2022 when OpenAI released ChatGPT. That really almost overnight took center stage in the technology world. Every CEO started talking about how they're implementing GenAI capabilities within their enterprise. They started committing to those efforts. All of a sudden, we saw the valuations of the stock of the organizations that are going to be implementing GenAI start to pop, and deployment, is underway. Estee Lauder, formed an AI innovation lab. Unilever had brought in a lot of capabilities to start developing that. J&J and many, many others as well. Right? Lots and lots of excitement on the topic of generative AI specifically. And of course, there is a lot of promise. There's a lot of expectations. Just a couple, mind-blowing stats that I've, recently seen. GenAI can automate about 30% of the work hours in the U.S. economy by 2030. GenAI is projected to raise the global GDP approximately 7%. GenAI can improve the productivity of very highly skilled workers by about 40%. I mean, those are really, really big expectations to live by. We'll see if we meet those. But fundamentally, we do agree that GenAI is going to have a transformative impact on the way that we're going to be working. It will have a transformative way in terms of how we're spending our work hours, really from automating those day-to-day activities and hopefully allowing us to shift to some of those higher order, strategic, creative work that we need to do, right? So fundamentally, hopefully, it really upshifts and elevates the value that we're able to deliver on an individual basis, right? So absolutely, GenAI is a big deal. It has the potential to drive really big impact, right? And it's going to change the day-to-day way we work. That all being said, the current approach to how organizations are deploying generative AI use cases has some concern, right? So currently, organizations are deploying GenAI as virtual assistants, looking at knowledge retrieval systems to enhance their knowledge management processes. They're using it for marketing content creation, customer chatbots, and all those different use cases that we've all heard of. But there is a fundamental risk to taking this use case-based approach, right? Individually, a lot of these use cases will have insufficient value creation to really live up to the expectations that Wall Street has set on these organizations that are touting all these Gen AI capabilities, right? It's going to lead to a lot of unwieldy technical debt across the organization. A lot of pilots will fail. It's going to lead to fatigue, some weariness, and of course, talent gaps. Has the workforce really been trained up to really understand how to leverage Gen AI to its full potential, how to bring it into the core processes, right? And we're already seeing some weariness, some exhaustion from all these different Gen AI pilots and all these different talks, right? So at Cloverpop, when we think about this topic, we want to take a step back, right? Rather than looking at a disparate approach to deploying Gen AI, and I will expand that to AI capabilities more broadly, we want to think about what is actually a more fundamental way to think about deploying Gen AI and AI capabilities. If we take a first order principles approach to that, how would we really think about it? And so that, of course, brings us to the topic of decision making, right? Great book and great study that some individuals at Bain had done a couple years ago, but they found that organizations that are considered decision leaders, they outperform their peer group by about 5x in shareholder value. Decision making is the most valuable asset of an organization. Organizational performance is just the sum of the decision it makes, right? So it makes sense for us to actually take a look at how can we align AI, Gen AI capabilities around decision making more broadly, right? And so why do we want to do that? Number one is organizations make about 10 million decisions each year. It's the most ubiquitous activity across the enterprise, ranging from the very strategic decisions, should we acquire or divest these brands, to the operational decisions, how do we price these various products, to the very tactical questions, which distribution center should we ship our overall products to, right? Second, decision-making is the point of confluence between the data analytics, the human expertise, the input, and the business context and the process. Decisions is where all those three elements come together. And lastly, and potentially most importantly, is that financial performance is directly linked to the quality of decisions we make. In that same research that I had alluded to just on the previous page, the study found that there's a 95% link between the quality of decision practices and execution of an organization and the financial performance of that organization. Okay, so we see decision-making as that foundational building block of business, right? So let's actually, step back and think about what is an actual decision. So I just pulled a, simple definition of a business decision. A choice made by a business or representative of that business that determines either a short-term or a long-term company activities, right? But if we break down a, generic process within, a decision process within an organization, we could break it down into 5 steps. The first is the situation has changed, maybe an event has occurred or some continuous process ongoing, and that triggers the need to make some type of a decision, right? Sales are down. Okay, should we, increase our marketing spend? So once we have that decision trigger, event has happened, we need to make a decision. The next question is, okay, what decision do we need to make? What are the questions that we need to ask? What data do we need? Which people do we need involved in that decision making? That takes us to the third step, decision making. Collecting the data, synthesizing the inputs, developing a recommendation, and accepting or rejecting that recommendation to make that decision. We then execute that decision, and then hopefully, and of course many of us fail to do this, but learn from those decisions, right? So when we think about a decision in our world, we think about it as a process that follows these 5 steps. And it's important to look at these decisions because they are made at every level of the business. Now, of course, from the CEO all the way down to the manager layer, there's different types of decisions we're making, right? CEOs are looking, where should we play? Which market should we enter? What kind of acquisition should we look at? VPs are looking at what types of innovation should we bring to market? Managers are looking at how do we actually adjust to daily demand of different products. And of course, there's different frequencies. The actual decisions have different value amounts tied to them. But we're all making business decisions. When we actually look deeper into the decision-making practices and processes of organizations, we find 3 key breakdowns across what we'll call the decision value chain. The first is what we like to call the data to decision disconnect. Organizations spend tens of millions of dollars developing big data infrastructure, spending a lot of money on harmonizing, cleaning that data, spend a lot of money on BI, dashboards, to try to democratize that information, analytics on top of that to help make sense of all that information, right? But the majority of that activity, what we had found, does not actually make it into the decision-making room or table itself, right? So a lot of unused data analytics within organizations are not actually influencing decisions. It is a fallacy to say most organizations are data-driven. That is not true at all. So that's one problem. Number 2 is what we like to call coordination or collaboration collapse. Decision-making within organizations have to be much more cross-functional. We got to break down silos. We work in a very geographically dispersed environment now as well. And so what we had found is actually the time to decision has been increasing rather than decreasing over time. And that is a problem. McKinsey actually tried to size that problem and found that the average Fortune 500 company loses about $250 million per year in productivity because of that lengthening time to decision. So massive, massive challenge there. And number 3, as I alluded to on the previous page, is a lack of learning. We could go and measure everything from throughput on machinery lines to the effectiveness on a various promotion. But if I go to a marketer and say, what were the last 100 decisions you made? Were they good or bad? 99.9% of them would say, we have no idea. So if we cannot capture, measure, and improve on those decisions, how could we improve our performance? So 3 key areas that we found really have been breaking down within organizations' decision processes. And so this takes us to the next page, which is how do we think about realizing the full potential of AI with decisions? And that requires a specific mind shift. We call this decision back thinking, right? Essentially, this is a decision-centric view that says rather than always starting with what data do you have, what kind of insights can we create from this to develop the recommendation to influence the decision, we have to flip that on its head and say, what is the business objective that we're trying to achieve? What are the decisions that we need to align in order to get to that objective? Then, who are the people, the data analytics that we need to actually support those elements? So it's much more of a value-driven, decision-back type of approach. Okay.
Lanny,
And so,
Lanny, there was a question earlier that I think you mostly addressed, but maybe it might be a good time.
Yeah.
Which is what kind of decisions are we talking about here? And I think given the timing of the question is sort of in that pyramid, like, is there an area where we're focused more, where we think there's more opportunity for AI to have a big impact?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll go down to this left side, so that strategic to the tactical decisions, right? So when we think about a decision, what we're really talking about here is the more complex ones, right? Where there is really a choice to be made. So that leads us to the operational decisions. How should we change our price? Where should we allocate our marketing dollars, our media investment? To the strategic ones. Tactical as well, right? But oftentimes tactical decisions around should we drive product from distribution center A to B, right? That could be mostly automated already, right? There's various rules based that will tell you exactly where it should go. But when there is some type of requirement of human in the loop, right? So any topics around commercial decisions, right? Marketing, sales, innovation, and those type. We need to combine both human input as well as AI, machine, together to make the best decisions. So when we're talking about decisions here, we're really talking about that operational and that strategic layer. Eric, any other anything you want to add to that one?
No, I think that's great.
Great. And we'll get to some examples to bring it to life, here in a second. So how do we actually bring this decision back way of thinking to address those three key problems that we described here within decision making? How do we actually do that? And that is the entire discipline and emerging category called decision intelligence. Decision intelligence is all about combining the human and the machine together to design the decision framework or playbook, to incorporate the modeling, facilitate the collaboration and orchestration of the various people across those cross-functional teams, executing the decision, and then learning and optimizing from that decision. And the key idea here is how can we facilitate this in a closed loop type of a fashion, right? And when we mean bringing the human plus the machine together, the question is how can we bring the great expertise and experience from the organization, right? Lots of institutional knowledge, lots of best practices. The reason we're all, making money at these organizations is because we have some type of expertise. How do we bring those elements in, as well as getting the benefit of the machine, right? AI, business intelligence, the infrastructures, all the different AI techniques that we could bring to bear, right? So when we're talking about decision intelligence, it's all about how do we bring the human plus the machine together? We're going to focus on how do we bring, in this call, we're going to focus on how do we bring the AI to the decision making, okay? So let's, quickly start around defining when we mean AI, what are we actually talking about? It goes beyond just generative AI, of course, right? So here, just, illustratively, I've bucketed about 5 different groups of AI capabilities. Generative AI, we're all very familiar with it, right? Predictive AI, this could be different types of forecasting, anomaly detection, sentiment analysis. Synthesis AI, the ability to actually connect multiple data points to develop a greater insight. Learning AI, right? So this could be from techniques like reinforcement learning, machine learning, et cetera. And automation AI, the ability to actually automate tasks and execution from those elements. So when we think about those 5 different areas, how can we actually apply these to the decision-making process that we described a bit earlier, right? And the way we think about it is looking at those different techniques as well as that overall process. And this actually helps us form the concept of a decision agent, right? The ability to bring multiple different AI techniques together across a decision-making process, right? So what does that actually look like? How do we understand when a situation has changed or an event has occurred that we need to respond to, right? So we bring to bear anomaly detection, right? The ability to detect when some type of unusual event has occurred, a deviation from a norm, right? That will then signal us that we need to have our attention on this occurrence, right? From there, okay, we know we need to make a decision. The next question is, which decision do we need to make? And what are the key questions that we need to address in order for us to actually go make the best decision there? A lot of times we're actually leveraging generative AI to actually help make sure we're brainstorming the right options to take, the right questions to ask, right? As well as knowledge graphs to help us understand who from the organization can actually support us in making these decisions, right? So that helps us really develop what we call a decision model or, a framework or a playbook, and also orchestrate the actual decision. Which data do we need to use? Who are the people that need to be involved? From there, we actually have to go make the decision, right? We have to bring in those we have to answer those multiple questions. We have to connect those to actually help develop a recommendation and make a decision from that. We leverage what we describe as synthesis AI, the ability to connect multiple dots across multiple different data sources to automatically generate insights and recommendations, right? We could also put predictive AI on top of that, whether it's some type of a forecasting capability or optimization capability, to also predict what is the best course of action from there. So we bring those two together to help actually make that overall decision. Once that decision is made, we could execute that, right? If it's more on those tactical, operational driven decisions, we could embed RPA, robotic process automation, to actually help update some of those elements within our ERP systems, within our websites, et cetera. Or GenAI, if it is more of a, this is the decision that's been made, we need to communicate this out to customers, vendors, and different partners. From there, the decision has been made. So the question then is, how do we capture that decision as a data point itself, collect multiple data points, and start to learn from those decisions, right? We call this decision learning or learning AI, right? So what this system is doing is it's capturing those decisions, monitoring the performance of those decisions, and over time, learning and optimizing to actually improve the actual systems and the logic being used to make those decisions. Let's look at an example, and then let's bring it to life, via a bit of a demo here. So if I look at, for example, across those 5 different elements, right? Let's start with that decision trigger. Here, we're looking at anomaly detection. So let's imagine the anomaly detection finds a 15% cost increase in some raw materials. Okay, the decision that to be made then is, should we prioritize profit or market share, right? Should we be looking at some type of a price adjustment? Well, we're looking then at what is going to be the customer's response to that price adjustment, what's going to be the impact to our financials, what's that going to do for our vendors, what's going to be the impact to do for our distributors or customers. Those are all questions that we need to answer. Different people will have that type of information, right? Once that is mapped, orchestrated, the synthesis AI is then going to look across those different levers to pull, synthesizing that information, and it's going to recommend take a 7% price increase. It's going to balance both the profit margins as well as maintain the optimal customer retention. From there, we got to execute on that decision, right? RPA could actually update the price across our different price lists, across our ERPs. GenAI could also then generate the communications to the various stakeholders that would be affected by those price changes. And over time, we're then going to start monitoring what is going to be the impact to market share, what's going to be the impact to sales, what's going to be the impact to our overall P&L. From there, that system is going to be learning and saying, okay, what else should we be doing in the future when this type of event happens? And it's going to make us smarter over time. Let me pause there really quick. Any questions around just the general construct, and then we'll get into the actual structure or some examples and an actual demo.
There was one question that came in about a McKinsey reference. So if people are interested in some of the references, I answered that in the QA pod. Okay. Otherwise, I think we're good, Lanny.
Awesome. So to the point of what type of decisions are we talking about, I want to provide, a few case studies here, right? So the first is with a consumer health company, think over-the-counter medicine, right? Organization is spending billions of dollars on marketing and media investments every single year. That's a process that's highly complex, lots of different signals coming in from, sales, also social media, sentiment, et cetera. So very difficult question to answer. How do we optimize where we actually spend our marketing dollars? Traditional marketing mix approach, of course, has been there for a very long time. But how do we actually execute against some of those recommendations? How do we optimize against those? It becomes a very highly political type of an exercise. It's very complex. That has to be optimized at total category levels, total brand levels, individual geographies as well, right? So in this example, we were actually able to deploy, these decision agents across the end-to-end process. And what we're able to actually accomplish there was an 80% increase in the time to insight and recommendations from before, right? Significant decrease, which leads to about 30% reduction in the resource requirements throughout that process. And this was just on the initial deployment. As that process goes, it's going to get more and more efficient. Right? Another example, consumer goods company, food and beverage, snacking company, needed to better understand from all their different brand equity data, their share data, their POS data, what actions should they take to improve their overall brand performance. So how do you do that right now, right? You bring in a market research agency, you bring in some syndicated data agencies, they provide you with a bunch of different recommendations, and you have to think about those options. But the organizations typically follow a similar pattern to getting to those recommendations overall. So why not automate that element end to end, right? And so that's exactly what we did with our D-Site capability, which is the decision agent we deploy. And what that was able to do is take 10 common logic structures or decisions that are being made, connect all the various data sources within it, and then deploy those decision agents to actually help develop recommendations. You'll see one example within the demo we'll get into. Right? And then a little bit more of a supply chain example. We have a customer that has oncology medicine. About 150 different raw materials go into every single batch. If one of those raw materials do not arrive on time, that's going to delay the actual delivery of those drugs. And given those are oncology drugs, the stakes are incredibly high, right? So how do you automate the decision around what actions do we take to mitigate any issues with our supply, right? What is the next best action to take? Where do we need to pull those vendors from? And how do we go execute that as fast as possible? So I just want to provide 3 examples of different deployments of these capabilities, just to provide a little bit of a flavor. Right? And we'll get into more detail here in a second. But I want to pause and actually, bring this to life a little bit. So bear with me as I switch to the actual demo instance of that process. And then Eric, let me know if the new screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Oh, perfect. Let me just unpause the screen here. Still here?
Okay. Yeah, I can see it there.
Excellent. So let's actually go through those 5 steps and show you how this actually works within decision intelligence platforms. So let's start with the first one, which is the decision triggers or anomaly detections, right? So let's say we have various strategies and different KPIs or objectives that we are monitoring to make sure that we are hitting those overall objectives, right? So let's take one example around inventory productivity. Okay, I could see this key metric here around, merchandise margin has dropped below the actual threshold. Okay, the next question is, what is the root cause of that change? So here, what we're able to see is this key metric is a function of merchandise margin, which is a connection of our gross merchandise value, and several different leading indicators actually help impact that metric itself, right? So let's take a look at what is driving sales down. We could see these different metrics that are accounting for that overall impact. And we could see the specific decisions that we need to make for us to actually go ahead and launch that decision, right? So should we launch a price match campaign, for example? That will launch a sequence of decisions to then be made with different people and begin orchestrating those, right? But how do we actually go to make sure that we have a holistic framework as we're making this type of a decision? So from decision intelligence platforms, they actually support you in 2 different ways. Number one is a set of pre-developed templates that help actually define how to make these decisions. Or we could use generative AI in this case to actually help design one of these frameworks from scratch, right? So let's go ahead and say we need to create a decision. Perhaps it's, should we adjust our positioning for this specific brand? Provide some context, some of the different options that we're considering. And we could add some drivers, right? So is the brand vibrant? What are some of the sub-questions? Are the consumers emotionally connected to the brand? Are there sub-questions? But we want to understand, okay, is this framework holistic? Are we missing anything? And this is actually where an LLM that's reinforced by a repository of past decisions and internal knowledge actually help ensure that the framework that we'll be using to make this decision is holistic, right? So in this case, Cloverpop AI provided a variety of different suggestions for us to actually improve that overall logic structure itself, right? So let's say we like this overall structure. We're going to go ahead and launch this overall piece. We know exactly what questions we need to answer. We know exactly who is going to be supporting those different elements itself. And we can incorporate the various data sources and plug them in to the different drivers of these specific decisions. Once these are all connected, the next question then is, how do we then go automate the insights and the recommendations to actually help us make those decisions, right? So we're going to go to DSight. So what this creates is a decision agent that actually helps us develop those recommendations, but also allows us to actually go into the details to understand exactly how we're making those decisions. Okay. So we could go ahead and hit the DSight analysis. And what that's going to do is actually provide us with the recommendation automatically. So do we need to adjust our positioning? No, but continue to track creative performance for these specific product attributes and see if we have that sustained differentiation versus competitors. This is all generated by that decision agent. But the question is, how did it get to that type of a recommendation? So to answer that, what the system is doing is it's leveraging that trained logic that we developed earlier, right? Is the brand distinct from competition? What are the key KPIs that it's looking for? Is the brand vibrant? What are the key KPIs it's looking for? Are consumers emotionally connected to the brand? What are the key things it's looking for? So the system will then create these various insights to help us answer this recommendation. Is the brand distinct from competition? We could always go further down to understand exactly what's happening underneath, as well as the underlying data that is getting us to those insights and then getting us to those recommendations itself. This approach provides us with both traceability and transparency into that overall recommendation process. Traceability in the sense that we know exactly the logic structure being used to get us to a business recommendation, as well as the transparency to allow us to go all the way through and audit the actual data, right? You would never get that from just a traditional LLM or a GenAI type of a platform, right? It's a bit of a black box. So how do we bring clarity to that process? This is exactly how we do it. So let's say we're okay with this overall decision. We could go ahead and start that decision process, right? And we have the answers already ready to go from the DSight analysis. We have the opportunity in this step to actually override to make sure there's a human in the loop throughout that process. I'm going to skip a step, but imagine we've taken the recommendation, we've gone ahead and made that decision. The last piece is, of course, learning from those decisions, right? So within decision intelligence platforms, we treat the decisions as data points, right? So the first thing we need to do is create a record of all those decisions. So this occurs within the decision bank. So here we have all the various decisions that have been made. They are pre-classified, so we can begin to actually start segmenting those decisions and learning from those. So going back to that question I asked earlier, do we need to adjust our positioning for product X, right? We can see it's been made 240 plus times. We could see some of the underlying analytics behind the activity of that decision. We could see the overall seasonality and occurrences of those decisions, the team dynamics, who is involved in these decisions, the actual acceleration and the efficiency gained throughout that process over time. But most importantly, what we're looking at is actually how those individual drivers impact the actual outcomes of those decisions, right? So across the various questions, at which level are we asking it? How often do we have information? What's our confidence in those? And what is the success of those decisions when we have that information versus what we don't? What this data set allows us to then do is optimize those decision playbooks and frameworks over time. So here we could see, do we need to adjust our product for positioning? There's optimizations recommended in terms of how we think about it the next time through, right? We could easily click on here, and it will start giving us suggestions on how to improve decision-making in the future. Right? So that takes us from the decision trigger piece, right? Understanding what is the actual, what is driving the change or the situational change that takes us to the decision to be made. We're then able to see exactly what is the logic structure we should use with help from the generative AI to actually make sure that we have the right decision criteria, connecting the data to that. We're then optimizing and automating the recommendations right here, making the decision, and then learning from it. So we just went from step 1 to 5 in that workflow that I had shown you earlier. So let's get back to it and actually take a look under the hood, what is actually happening across these various steps and how we actually design those systems.
Lanny, I think maybe a question is a good point to answer a question. I'll just read it out and then you can go through it. So I love the approach and sophistication of the decision-making process. What's the minimum size organization that it makes sense to use this approach? And what factors would you address for board decision-making? I think they meant board of directors.
So 2 factors. I think the democratization of different AI capabilities as well as decision intelligence platforms have increased have allowed for a much broader adoption of these types of platforms, right? So the level of the size of the organization does not have to be as big anymore, right? So this is not limited to Fortune 500 companies. You know, some of our, customers are in the $50 to $100 million range, right? So the question that I think about a little bit more is, what is the maturity of that organization, right? And how adept at they are in terms of process standardization. A very small startup, right, is not looking at, standardizing these processes and scaling these processes as much, right? But more mature organizations, the ones that are, 10, 15, 20 plus years old, have a consistent process, right? And they need to start optimizing against those processes and those decisions up and down. The second question, Eric?
What factors would you address for board decision-making?
It's a good question, right? So it depends on your board, of course, and what kind of decisions you're making with them. I'm laughing because we have a board meeting coming up, and so we actually use Cloverpop, for some of those decisions. But number one is boards love the concept of DIPs from a collaborate perspective and that recording of those decisions. When I come to the board and I have a very clear logic structure of how we got to a decision, here's the logic, here's the underlying data, and here's the recommendation, right? That carries a lot of weight. So, personally, we make decisions or recommendations, at least everything from, fundraising to budgeting to hiring, and those types of elements with the board. Eric, any other perspectives?
I think the one thing I would sort of extract from what you were saying is that there is an underlying increase in value when there's scale or repeatability of these decisions. It's for sure true that AI has made it less expensive and less complicated to deploy these. So it does mean that smaller companies can use them. There is still some work that has to be done. And so having those decisions those decision templates, for example, that you're showing be used more often means that the ROI is increasing each time it's used.
Exactly.
So if there's if in a bigger company, they can get bigger scale, basically. But I think your main point is right, which is that AI has lowered the bar on the level of sophistication required or investment required.
Exactly right. You no longer have to build all these systems in-house. You could use companies like Cloverpop to do that. So
right.
So what I want to spend maybe 10 minutes on is just going a little bit deeper in terms of how we actually think about the elements that you saw on your screen, below. So again, we talked about 5 different steps from a decision-making process, right? So let's start with the first. Decision triggers. How do we know when a situation has changed and which decisions we need to make, right? So to apply AI to decision triggers, we always want to start with mapping the key drivers of the objective that we're trying to get to, right? So let's say the key business goal is revenue growth, right? This is a highly simplified example. But what are the key metrics or levers that we need to think about? Pricing, distribution, volume, the equity of our overall brand. And what are all the components that influence these different elements? And across each one of those components, what are the data sources that provide that signal, right? So the first thing we do is create that overall model to understand, okay, when price elasticity goes up or down, what impact does that have on pricing? What impact will that have on revenue growth? Same thing from, sources of volume. When sales go down, what's going to be the impact on those, right? So we create these sensitivity analyses across that entire logic tree, that decision tree. At the same time, what we do is capture how the business, which options, which decisions the business can make in order to actually support and execute against those elements, right? So it's two elements coming together to help support that one objective of revenue growth. What are the decisions it makes, as well as how do we understand the sensitivities of those elements? When those come together, which is what you saw in the first piece, right? Which is first understanding, okay, the key KPI, our lagging indicator, so to speak, has gone down. Okay, what are all the different metrics that we have more influence on? What is the root cause of that drop? Once we understand that element, we understand what kind of impact it's had, right? And then it'll tell us, okay, what decision do we need to make? And who within the organization needs to make those decisions, right? So this is the decision trigger element of it. So once we have that decision,
Lanny, I think maybe there's a good point to add in to answer a couple more questions that came in, and probably you can answer one and then I. First is about availability of information. So how do you cope when there are blind spots in the availability of required information? And I think that applies to triggers as well as actually making the decision itself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this goes back to always taking that decision back approach, right? So whether we have data or no data, right? We want to understand, okay, to make a decision around, I'll just go back to that price adjustment question. Should we adjust our price? Okay. The questions you need to ask just from a business perspective is what's going to be the impact on our customer demand? What will be the impact on our brand perception? How will our competitors react? How will our, distributors react? Okay. So once we have that overall logic structure, in some cases, we will have direct data sources, right? So we could get price elasticity metrics to answer questions around consumer response. And other questions around what will the competitive reaction be? That's exactly where the human comes in, and that's the beauty of decision intelligence platforms, where we could actually provide input of the actual experts within the organization, people that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years that have been through these situations before. They could provide that qualitative input into the system, and it will take account of those different elements, right? Also, the question of, data availability, right? It doesn't always have to be a perfect stream of information. DIPs like decision intelligence platforms like Cloverpop are able to actually bring in both structured and unstructured data as well, right? So whether it's from, your direct APIs from your ERP systems, or it's a PowerPoint deck from the market research agency that you just worked with, you could input all that data into the DIPs.
Great. I think that really hits it. And the flip side of that is actually the second question, which is, and I'll take a first cut and maybe you can add to it. Research suggests that decision-making can be very immature, meaning subject to cognitive biases and so forth. How do you take that level of immaturity into account? And this is for a passion project for me for the past over a decade. Done enormous amount of research into it, and published a lot of it as well on our website, various white papers. The key answer to bias correction in general, the analogy I use is my glasses. So every morning I wake up and my eyes are biased to see about 6 inches in front of my face. And I put glasses on and I can see more clearly. So these glasses are essentially a tool. And the reason they work is that my biases are the same every day. And that's true for us too. These cognitive biases don't vary randomly. They're very predictable. They're very consistent. And so a critical way to address these biases is to put in place templates and actually written or record-oriented templates are very good at counteracting biases. If you're presented with a set of 4 questions that you should answer before making a decision, when you show up and look at that template, your biases are going to tell you, oh, that's the most important question. I don't need to answer these other questions. Biases tend to overemphasize certain things and de-emphasize others. But these templates and decision intelligence platforms are based on how decisions actually need to be made. They're coming decision back, as Lanny said. So actually taking the effort to answer the questions that need to be answered automatically corrects for the bias. That's the glasses, that template, those sets of questions, that information that the decision intelligence platform is forcing you to look at, even though your biases don't want you to look at them or make them seem less important. As soon as you see them, the bias gets corrected. You can't help it, right? You can't unsee the elephant, so to speak. So it in essence, it feels almost like a discipline, or it sounds like a discipline. Oh, I have to do this work. But the way it works is more like glasses, which is as soon as you answer the question, suddenly your biases actually fall away. But it's a great question. I don't know, Lanny, if there's anything you would add to that.
No, you said it well. Essentially, these decision intelligence platforms are designed to remove the human bias in decision making, right?
While retaining the human genius, right? Because there's still a lot of incredible power inside of our brains and in our behaviors. It's just correcting for the parts that basically try to hide information from us or overemphasize information that's maybe not as important as it seems.
Yeah.
Great. Those are the questions.
Awesome. So once we've identified a decision needs to be made and who needs to be involved in it, right? Then the question is, okay, how do we make sure that we're looking at the right questions and we have the right data and connecting those 2 different elements, right? So that's a great use case for actually generative AI. So for example, the way we deploy it within our systems is leverage those LLMs as well as the decision banks or that repository to actually then help provide recommendations on which questions we should be asking to make sure that as we're making these decisions, we're thinking about all the different considerations that need to be made, right? Additionally, the systems can then predict and identify who in the organization is probably best suited to help answer those questions based on the previous interactions and various knowledge graphs, okay? But those individual questions that those people are responsible for, we also are connecting to the relevant data, right? So if, this individual here, Hubert Humphrey, for example, he needs to address brand funnel metrics, we could connect those various analyses, those data sources to the system, right? The next part is where it becomes very interesting, right? So now that we've connected the logic structure, the people, the data together, the next question is, how do we connect the business decisions at the very top level, right? Do we need to optimize our media spend, as an example? Okay, what are the business issues that we need to think about as we're making those decisions? What are the key insights that we need to make? What are the KPIs that will help inform those? And what are the various data sources that we need to use, right? So how do we actually connect all these different layers from data to the insights to the business decisions itself, right? And that's exactly what I was showing when it came to that, what we describe as DSight, which is our decision agent capability. That will connect multiple different data sources, synthesize that information up using that business logic to provide a recommendation. Now, we always need to test the actual assumptions. We need to actually look through that information, right? So decision makers are then able to query the actual system to see, okay, ask various questions to validate the recommendations. It will actually provide with pre-curated templates and dashboards as well, and also look under the actual hood there, right? So this is where that transparency and traceability comes into place. The ability to actually look through that logic structure to see exactly what are the recommendations being made, and that transparency to see the underlying data. Once we've done that, and once we're comfortable with that decision, maybe we've overridden some of those recommendations, that's the human in the loop factor, the decision is made, it's executed, and we're seeing some results. This is where things get very exciting, which is decision intelligence platforms for the first time enable us to actually treat decisions as data points in a systematic way, right? So every decision is treated as a data source, and there's specific attributes to that data, right? We've got the business context, the logic that was used, the people involved, the different information sources, the data sources, structured, unstructured, qualitative human-led inputs, and the decisions made and the outcomes. Those are all captured within that record of the decision. And then that's what allows us to then look at those past decisions and understand, okay, how do we improve the actual decision-making in the future? How do we improve those templates in an automatic fashion? This allows us to refrain from having to do these process re-engineering projects all the time and look through all these manually. We're taking the best practices of the organization as they naturally occur and help elevate those to then standardize those processes. Right? So this is the learning piece of that entire piece. So that is a little bit just underneath the layer of what you've seen in the demo. If anybody has, additional questions, please let's, spend the next 10 minutes or so on that. But also, feel free to email either Eric or myself. Our emails are right here. If you'd like a deeper demo, the link is at the bottom here, just cloverpop.com. And, as a thank you for attending this webinar, what we'll be doing is sending you both the white paper that goes into these topics in a little bit more detail, as well as the PowerPoint that you've just seen today. So thank you all for joining. I'll just open it up to further questions.
Yeah, Lanny, a question just came in, and I think I can probably answer it pretty simply. So the question is, as you deploy this tool across various clients, is the business logic and decision algorithm kept within the umbrella of individual clients, or is the tool learning from insights it gathers across clients and using some of that learning to inform its recommendations to subsequent clients? So in this case, we're very security oriented in our approach. So there's no cross bleed between data between clients at all. So we're not creating some super genius centralized AI that's looking across all these companies and learning. We do, of course, as a company, learn from client improvement or client needs and add features to the product that all of our customers can use. But I think that not just us as a vendor, but any vendor, I believe that it's important that that learning stay within the company. That's essentially one of the big assets of the company. As Lanny said, the decisions the company makes, it defines the company. So that needs to be kept, in my opinion, within the company. It's the most important thing the company has. Right now, companies mostly don't keep records of them, so it's kind of tacit knowledge and just sort of exists in the ether. But as that becomes more concrete, it becomes even more important. So there's certainly learning. All of us and other vendors that are providing these types of tools are learning what kind of user interfaces are needed, or what features are needed, what capabilities are needed, or we improve our ability to create, to model data and so forth, or import data. But the fundamental data itself is really quite proprietary to each company. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Lanny.
No, exactly right. Your decisions are your data, and we want to keep it that way.
Yeah. And I think we answered the other questions either directly or throughout the presentation.
Perfect.
Oh, here's a couple more just came in since we have a couple minutes. Do you use some predictive model trained on the company's data? That's one question. And it's sort of related, how do you set the importance weights or responsibility levels for historical decisions?
So the first one is we absolutely train the models on the company's data, right? So whether it's an optimization or a forecasting element, right? So we will create those ad hoc or bespoke models that will then go in and inform those different elements. So absolutely right. So if we want to understand category growth, we'll actually develop category forecasts, brand forecasts, those types of elements. If we need to do some type of an optimization, we're actually looking that piece up, right? So that actually happens in the setup piece. So the way all this actually comes together is really in 3 steps to production, and the 4th happens on an ongoing basis, right? The first step is always, let's understand how the business is making these decisions first. So we want to understand the business logic that is being used. From there, that's where we're really deploying the decision analytics and AI to then understand, okay, what is the best forecasting model? What is the optimization that we need to deploy within that platform? Then we start automating the actual recommendations and insights. Then you have a live instance, right? Over time, then those are being optimized as you're using those capabilities.
Right, I think that got to it. The importance weights. I think that you're referring to like what inputs or what behaviors or what actions went into each decision and how do they correlate. And there's sort of two, for me, the way I look at it, there's two steps in that. One is actually just the human level of insight, keeping records of 10 or 20 or 30 decisions and then looking across those. We will frequently, when working with clients, have them say, oh, wow, here's a big insight that I didn't have before. That doesn't even require statistical analysis or anything like that. There's no need for AI. It's like, oh, wow, we're not considering the actual marketing budget for these new products before we green light the new product release, right? Which is sort of an obvious thing once you see it, but it's hard to see in just the day-to-day operations of things. The second level is more getting into the sort of data science and AI side of things, and we use a variety of different techniques there. I think that that's probably something more easily discussed in the specific instance. It might involve modeling and simulation. There might be, if there's more unstructured data, there might be natural language processing happening or machine learning happening. So it does vary quite a bit. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So, and we're right at time. So it's great.
Perfect. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. So as a follow-up, of course, we'll be sending you, these two documents, the white paper and the presentation you saw today. And just want to thank everybody for, spending an hour with us this morning. I hope everybody has a great day.
Take care.